Yeah.
Strange.
Hello, Deirdre.
Hello, Steve. How are you?
Good. Pleasure to be with you on this nice fall Saturday.
You too. You too.
Let's start with what's before us.
So do you want to get a shot of the arch in its reclined position?
There we go.
I'm almost feeling like we're at a wake, you know, that this arch has had a life already and it's in the next season of its life. It's kind of in keeping with the leaves that are falling and the change in our neighborhood.
Do you want to speak to its prior state?
Yeah, so the last time you and I spoke, this arch was standing very heroically, like a proper arch should, and it was as tall as my hands reach, like this. I could put my hands like this underneath it, just to give you an idea. And I can actually pick it up and show you, and I think it'll still sort of like has the ability to unfold. But as you can see, its ephemeral nature has really kicked in. And it's been very interesting to watch how the failure of structure occurred. It didn't happen as I had thought it would, because it's still got a very strong foundation. You can see like it's still completely pinned into the ground on both sides. But what failed was the structural armature I used was extremely flexible. It was flexible zinc, and when the cardboard, there was so much rain over the past week or so in Chicago and wind, and so it constantly kept going like this because the wind was from the north. And what happened when the cardboard got saturated enough, the weight was what eventually caused the zinc inside to fail, and it actually crumpled like this. So it's sort of, you know, I came out at one point and it really looked like it wanted to take a nap. Kind of like myself, like us all sometimes. And so I did try and restore it and put it up for another little while, and it lasted a few hours. And then it just completely collapsed. And I have promised myself and this sculpture that I will observe it with gentle curiosity, a kindness, and so I'm preventing myself from, you know, fixing it or correcting it in any way. I'm just trying to accept that this is the next phase in its lifespan, because by its very title it is ephemeral. And this is, you can really see the damage. It's very upsetting to see like the inside here. You're starting to see like what it really is made of, you know, the cardboard. You can see the gesso layers. You can see the big crack in the sort of heaviness and weight of the damp cardboard. So it was made from discarded waste. It became something sculptural when I made it assume the form of the arch, and now it has sort of become back into showing its trashness a little bit, you know. So it is, there's something very sad about it, and, you know, somewhat poignant, but also, you know, I'm calling it Reclined Arch because it is sort of like a natural phase for it. And I tell you, I mentioned to you before we started the interview, I feel like I've, you know, just in the process of stopping myself and trying to observe it and like learning from the arch, being totally accepting of whatever this process brings. I think I've generated like 5 years of work because I'm just, you know, I'm being shot in so many directions. It's actually hard to talk about right now, because I think I'm sort of like in the middle of it. So can I ask you a question? When you, because we had talked at length when it was an arch, and we made some video footage of it. When you first perceived it as a collapsed structure, what was your first thought? How did it make you feel?
Oh, this is simply natural.
Really?
Like it didn't.
Oh, that's really good to hear.
It didn't strike me as a. I mean, it had collapsed, but I didn't see it as any sort of structural or conceptual or physical failure. It was simply, well, this is its new state, and given the ephemeral nature of the original arch, it's simply. It was supposed to be ephemeral anyway.
Yeah.
And so this is what it looks like when that occurs. So, so in a way, it came as no surprise to me.
And I found it to be quite delightful that it was still out here.
Huh.
And that
You had not removed it, or you had not tried to.
when I say move it, I mean remove it from the site.
Or even try to move it so that it looked a different way, or had some.
I guess you could have arranged it in a more aesthetic way or something like that, but you just let it rest.
Well, Enzo and I came out that first morning, and Enzo brought his rope with him and his magic tape, and he really wanted me to tie the rope to the tree and have it back as an arch again. And it was very hard for me to leave it, I have to admit. It took all my willpower to just not take it back inside, try and make it stand up again, maybe using a different material, I don't know. But I genuinely, you know, I kind of want to be true to the nature of the arch. And I thought I would be more upset. And I'm really glad to hear you say that, you know, it wasn't upsetting for you to see as much as that this was just the next phase in its life. And that's kind of how I've been feeling. Like, the poor thing needed a rest, and now it's lying down. And I'm getting all these memories and references of, you know, I don't know if I'm like projecting onto the arch now, but you know, like when I first saw it, I was like, oh my God, it keeps reminding me of Henry Moore's Reclined Women form, the female form reclining. And just sort of like it was so graceful when it first fell. I'm kind of regretting just not leaving it like that, because I tried to put it back up again, and then it fell down sort of more violently. And then it rained again, so it became sort of heavier, and it's still in that state because it's in a site that is actually quite sheltered, but those days of weather that we had recently were enough to sink a boat in Belmont Harbour. You know, it was intense northeastern wind, and then north wind, and then just intense rain for a very prolonged period of time.
Can you share with us your experience with Henry Moore?
Oh yeah. So Henry Moore was my idea of sculpture when I was a child, because there was a lot of Henry Moore's art, public sculpture in Dublin where I grew up. There was a very famous, very abstract version of Henry Moore in Trinity College, in between these two trees that were 500 years old. And so I would make a point when I was commuting to my college course. I went to the National College of Art and Design in Dublin, which was a long walk from Trinity College, but I used to cut through as a shortcut. So I would see those trees and see that sculpture. And that kind of defined my idea of what public art looked like for a long time. And then I received or perceived that was a bad thing, that this was kind of like plop art, you know, that it's not really okay to just put something in a place. But at the same time, I think I sort of I try and work between those polarities of wanting my sculpture to be public, but also the nature of the materials makes it something that I do in private. I'm working with it one-on-one. I'm not offering it up to a fabricator yet. I don't know if that it'll develop into that later. But Henry Moore and his idea of what sculpture looks like has really sort of gone into my consciousness, I think. And so now I sort of forgot that until this happened. You know, that's another kind of monumental form, I suppose. Because we talked about monuments a lot in our last talk together, and maybe we could come back to that idea. And I've since had an amazing conversation with both of our neighbour, Beth Spencer, who lives next door as well. And Beth works at the Field Museum, and she and I had a long conversation after we did the Instagram Live last time, the interview, which she was able to hear that. And she said that the materials that she works with, and she's been able to observe anthropologists' perspective of trying to preserve these very ephemeral materials in a museum setting. So like the archival nature is nothing. They were never designed or made to be kept. And Beth said something that just keeps ringing in my head, and it was that the gumption we have from that like Western perspective that I think we received from the Greco-Roman tradition, where a monument has to be something that stands for the ages, right? I mean, I looked in the constant scroll that we're all familiar with on Instagram or the internet. I saw this sculpture that was somewhat recently rescued from the bottom of the Mediterranean, and it was a bronze, and it was a Greek statue, and now it's in a museum somewhere again, you know? I mean, that was thousands of years ago, and it's still standing. So that's what that perception of public art is, of monumental art, that we've inherited in our world today, I think. And it's kind of a sad one. And Beth told me that they had someone come and speak to them from the Pokagon tribe, who were responsible for many of the baskets that they have in the Field Museum collection. And this tribal elder explained to them that in his tradition, they see these baskets as being imbued with spirit, that they are living objects, and they are made and they are connected with the greater creator. When they are made, the artist and the great creator connect, and they make this object, and it has a life, usually of utility and use and beauty. And then at the end of that life, it's very important to them that they have a ceremony where they remove that spirit and allow it to be free and go back to the world. And then they allow that object to disintegrate by being composted or taken back out of utility and utilization. And she told us another story he told them of when treaties were being signed and broken. Apparently their tribe made a treaty with Indiana University, or one of those colleges, maybe it was Purdue. I'm sorry, I can't remember which one, we'll have to ask Beth. But that they got a contract with that university that the tribe would provide all the baskets for the laundry in the whole campus, right? So dormitories, everybody who needed laundry done would use their baskets. And every year the tribe came back and they collected all the used baskets that were not usable anymore, and they took them to perform this ceremony. And it was extremely important to them that they received the end of that object so they could properly and ceremonially dispose of it with a ritual. And it makes me think so much about, that's kind of what I had in mind for this arch without knowing that. And the fact that I chose to put this ephemeral material out in the rain, I did that purposefully. You know, I've done terrain before. I know how hard it is to get an object to stand for 6 weeks. Last time I did it with plastic, and it was a lot easier. But I think had we had the weather we had recently, even my plastic bottle sculpture would have keeled over.
Yeah.
Because it was extreme and prolonged wind and rain. That survived snow. It survived sun, but I don't know if it could have survived that kind of wind. So anyway, here we are at the arch again. And
So
yeah, keep going, sorry.
I know you're still processing
Yeah.
a lot that's happened to the arch, and as you talk about these the baskets and their functionality and also ritual value in the spirit. Do you have any sense of the spirit of this piece?
Yeah, I do. I really feel like it's taken a position of repose, and I am deliberately allowing it to rest here so I can talk about that to neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a wonderful conversation with a new neighbor friend who I saw walking by, who had a small baby in a
Mm-hmm.
stroller, and I laughed with her because she stopped to read the sign, and I told her that the original images are still available. If you take a picture of the QR code, you can see the original
Mm-hmm.
arch as it was installed here on my website. And I laughed when I saw her because I was like, you know, this is becoming a monument to maternal exhaustion and burnout, which I know anyone who's been a mother this past year, 2 years, especially to have a newborn during that time, has experienced that. And I myself have experienced that. And I feel like this, which is not as pleasant to look at, you have to admit, as a heroic standing arch, it's kind of tragic and sad and looks like a mistake. But and in its darkest, it was reminding me, you know, of those images we all saw again for the celebration, or not celebration, but the marking of September 11th.
Mm-hmm.
Those jagged edges that are never meant to be seen, you know, when something collapses.
Mm-hmm.
So like being able to see the inside here is very upsetting to me, but at the same time I kind of feel like it's important to show. So I guess I'm still trying to figure out a way I can celebrate that and talk about it even, or just have a conversation about it like we're doing. It's helping me figure it out too, you know. I honestly didn't know what was going to happen when I put this arch here, and I am trying to be okay with whatever does happen, whatever occurs.
Was it always that way? Were you always okay with it?
My arch,
With the
this particular piece?
particular
Or-
position that it's
Oh.
in now?
No, I mean, I told you it's hard to restrain myself from fixing it, you know, from mending, from protecting it from further damage.
Did anyone tell you that this has happened, or did you discover it yourself?
Oh, I
one
discovered
day?
it myself, yeah. So I live just 2 doors down, and I was coming out every morning and looking from the window, and then one morning I couldn't see it. So Enzo, my son, and I ran out in our pajamas, and I saw it, and it was the first time it had, you know, collapsed and was definitely reclining, and it was in a sort of a Mobius strip form, you know, it had kind of folded itself into a loop. And I left it there. I took some footage of that. I did post an image of that on Instagram if anyone wants to see it, at Deirdre Colgan Jones. And but then my impulse was to try and put it back up again, and it worked. I was able to revive it and put it back up again, and this time it had been leaning very far to the south because of that constant north wind strain. And I found that if I leaned it to the north, it actually started standing up again and being self-supporting. And it stayed like that, I think, for 4 or 5 hours that day. And then the next time I came out, I saw that it had collapsed, and this time it was actually broken. You know, the cardboard had completely failed. And I was sort of regretting having interfered with it that first time. And now I've just avoided, you know, trying to put it back together. It's still very sturdily, you know, connected to the ground. It's still got its you know, foundation intact, believe it or not, and that goes into the ground like 10 inches. And I'm fascinated by that it managed to retain the foundation, but everything else sort of fell down.
What is the next step for this piece?
So the Lakewood Balmoral Residents Council editorial board very kindly accepted a article about it, and it was distributed to neighbours online. It's a weekly emailed newsletter. I had planned to do an interview about the arch with the physical newsletter that gets distributed quarterly, which would be coming out again in December. And I'll have to have a conversation with the person who wanted to write that and see if she's still interested. Because that's a woman called Betsy who lives locally as well. I think she's on the next block over on Wayne. I had advertised that in that article about an event I had been planning for next 1 week from today, which is November 6th, Saturday. And I had publicly invited neighbours and anyone who was interested to come to the site and let me know their invisible labour, to have it documented on the site for the last week of the Terrain Biennial run, and attach them in a similar way to the Yoko Ono wish tree, for example, like put them on branches. You know, I've prepared a lot of pieces of recycled mailers and plastic that people can write on with a Sharpie, or they can send it to me by email or as a comment on Instagram, and I will attach them for them. And so I had planned to be out here for a period of 2 hours and just see who stopped by to interact and talk about it as an opportunity to have conversation with neighbours. A lot of people who live in this neighbourhood walk by it all the time and may not understand now why it's not standing anymore, or they saw the image in, as we had occur before we began our interview, somebody stopped by expecting a heroic arch, and I asked them about it and they said, oh, we thought it was going to be much bigger, so they were kind of like, I felt bad for them, because it is disappointing when you come to see an arch and this is what you find. But that is the nature of this piece. It is an ephemeral arch, and I invited them to go and look at the images online, which they did, and I would love to talk more about this, Hi, how are you? How is it that we're more accepting of when a piece looks a certain way or performs a certain way, and then what happens when it's not as you expected to find it? But instead of that event, I've decided to do something else with the arch, because I've been thinking about this idea that there is a defined and a designated ritualistic end to the life of this sculpture, and that it is ephemeral. So I always knew it would not last beyond the period of the Terrain run, which is through November 15th. And I really wasn't sure what was going to happen to it. It could go into the graveyard of sculptures I have in my basement, which would be really sad. But instead of that, I want to carve it up. I genuinely have decided now I'm going to take a tool and cut into it and break it up. And I'm going to look at it as a series of fragments and parts that exist independently, but also that person would know that this is from a greater whole. That it is made of fragments that were combined together to create a form, and it seems to me like a really natural part of the cycle of its life that it would then go back into these fragments. But those fragments are very different. This time they're not like unfolded cardboard boxes. They are consciously selected pieces. So if you want to bring the camera over here, so in my mind this would be like a sirloin selection of steak, whereas maybe this, I would want to keep this intact. I like how this piece, but then maybe this is a little fragment here, where two lines come, and then you really start seeing the details of the pieces as they connect. But then the fact that they would be fragmented again is actually the more I think about it becoming very appealing. So that's my vague plan for what to do with it. And the fact that I have a publicized opportunity to do this, where I would be observable by people in the neighborhood that may come to talk about invisible labor, I'm just going to welcome that conversation and go forward with this next part in the arch's life. And then I will need to dry the arch pieces very carefully, and there's still 1 week left in the run of the show, so I'll have to determine what do I leave, what stays for the last week. And to be honest, I'm really not sure. I love the idea that I have enough of these invisible labor writings by people that come, that would be what remains. And I also am thinking a lot about how I can potentially weatherproof a series of these pieces, or so, make them the last stand of the arch, that the fragments, almost like the way we would find a ruin, or embrace that part of the life cycle of any building that is just allowed to fall, like Wordsworth's monasteries. I mean, we observe those and we appreciate them as ruins, so why not a sculpture? So that's sort of some ideas I've been having about.
A lot of opportunities that grow out of something that maybe initially seems like bad news.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I wasn't surprised, to be honest, but I just didn't know how I was going to feel, and I felt a lot more optimistic about it than I thought I would. That's for sure.
Well, it's been a real pleasure for me to see. I live even closer to the arch and to the Reclined version than you do, and it's been really interesting to talk to you about this state that it's in, having talked to you quite a bit about its former state. And that change has been just really interesting, and I think for me really adds another layer or several layers that we wouldn't be talking about.
That's true.
Right now.
Yeah.
So it's really.
I'm really grateful to you, Steve, because I think, originally we made a recording of an interview when the arch was standing, and for some reason that recording, the sound did not retain. But I'm welcoming that, because now we have this chance, this opportunity to have a totally different conversation about this next phase of the arch, and it's really helping me to look at it through both an artist's eyes, another artist's eyes, but also a neighbor's eyes, and it's really unique. So thank you so much for doing these interviews with me.
I feel grateful that you installed this piece as part of the Terrain Biennial. And I really love the piece that you did last year too.
2 years ago.
Oh, sorry, 2 years ago. That's why it's a biennial.
Yeah, that's right. I know, it
years,
seems
right?
like last year, but time has been such a weird thing lately. Yeah, but believe it or not, that was like in 2019, before COVID was even a thing.
Yeah.
Right? So it's a very different time we're finding ourselves in, and I feel like this piece is more appropriate to that than the last piece. So what happens next is still open. I'm trying to remain open to the process, to accept the improvisational flow of what I'm inspired to do to help the piece go back into the ground, so to speak, but also to really try and be humble about it and learn from it. Like, let it teach me what needs to happen next. And it's difficult, because I keep wanting to, I can feel my ego trying to come in here and say, oh my God, I don't want to fail so publicly, this is a nightmare. But at the same time, I really, that's become a very small part of the voice in my head. The bigger voice is, I can really learn from this and use it to generate a ton of work. It's a very fertile ground right now. and that's exciting. It's more exciting than the fear voice of, you know,
Yeah.
you're in public and it looks pretty miserable. So yeah, it's been a weird week or so of dealing with this.
Well, thanks again as your neighbor and fellow artist for making the piece, and I think all of us in the neighborhood look forward to what's going to happen 2 years from now.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. Great, thanks Steve. Thank you everyone who watches this.